So please welcome from Arizona, and he is one of the few people not packing a gun, Bill Davis.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, so Jazz the Nash. I'm going to dive through this really quickly because I want to leave as much time for question as possible because I'm sure a few of you will have questions about Final Cut Pro 10 and what I did. That's me. That's enough. Okay, moving along. This is some of the work that I do. I'm a corporate video producer. I've been doing this for about 20 years now. I was an early adopter of Final Cut Pro 1.0 and worked all the way through until about, I'd say about 18 months ago when I started the swap over. I spent about 3 months in transition, and then I had to go back and do a project in Final Cut Pro 7, and it pissed me off so much that I eventually just said, okay, I'm making the jump all the way. And I haven't touched 7 now in about a year. So it's been an interesting transition. If you have a cell phone that takes pictures, or if you might have one that does QR codes, if you would like to know any more about me, you can pull out your phone, use your QR code reader, point it at that, or if you'd like just take a picture of that and go to it later, that will get you to my website, give you some information. There will be a couple more of these through here that will send you to other places that you might want to go. So, quick audience survey. I know Michael did it about who's using other editors, but this is kind of like my quick, where is the audience in terms of Final Cut Pro 10 knowledge specifically. So on one end, I use it for everything, and I don't expect there to be a ton of us doing that. On the other end, yeah, I heard about it, but I've never seen it. So let's start on the left. How many people are using it for everything? Anybody other than me? Oh, look at that. 4 or 5 or 6. My peeps. Good for you. How many of you are using it for some along with other NLVs? I expect more of those. Okay, so about the same amount. You've explored it a little bit, but you're not using it for any paid work at this time. Okay, good. I expected that to be the largest group, and I'm surprised that there's that much equality. And anybody here never even opened it. Great. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. That's fabulous. You've heard a lot about it. I am not here to dissuade you about all that. I'm here to try to tell you something about how it worked for me. And so I did this project because I was fascinated. When 10.0.3 came out and we all heard that it had this new multicam thing and the multicam thing was kind of cool, I downloaded it, I wanted to try it, and I opened up this cool window that allowed me to do 16 cameras, but I didn't have anything to do 16 cameras with. And I got really frustrated, and I said, well, how can I tell if this thing's good, bad, or indifferent if I can't really test it out? So I mounted a production. Because I was in a unique position, I think, to be able to do that. I had been lecturing to some of the still photographers in my area because a lot of them are interested in video. So I knew a lot of guys with DSLRs, and a lot of the guys with DSLRs, men and women, also had GoPros. And I thought, you know, I can actually get 16 cameras together and try this. And so it turned into my own little project. It was a lot of fun. We shot a 5-piece jazz band. You're going to see some of it, and you're going to see a lot of my workflow, how I kind of put this thing together. These are some of my goals for the project. Mostly it was the bottom one. I just wanted to see what was new in Final Cut Pro 10 as it evolved and what I could do with it. This, for those of you who have never seen the interface, is the angle editor in Final Cut Pro 10. Like all other multicam implementations in most NLEs, you just click on whatever picture you want to take and it swaps out for the big picture, and then when you get back to the timeline, you've had a cut made of those basic choices. So it's just click, 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 click as you play your videos in the angle editor, and you do your rough cut. A few notes. I mentioned still photographers. Please, I hope as you watch this is not shot by professional video folks, so be kind to them there. You'll see some clunky camera moves and stuff like that. There were some other things, though, that were really fascinating as I went through this process. One of them was time management. If any of you are crazy enough like I was to try to get a lot of cameras out, there's some very powerful things it allows you to do, but it also does really blow up your production schedules, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. It did also start me to think differently, and in fact, that's a theme with me with Final Cut Pro 10. As a longtime legacy editor, now in Final Cut Pro 10, I find I'm facing a lot of things and I'm thinking about them differently because the engineers at Apple thought about some of their things differently. That's not a good, bad, or indifferent. It is different, and some of the differences have kind of inspired me to look at what I do in just pure editing differently. You'll see some more of that as we come along. There's a quick onset shot. That's how we put this thing together. If you want to know more, go to the website. There'll be another QR code in here that'll take you to more stuff about the project. But take notes. Please ask me as much as you can. I'll try to leave as much time for that. Lots of lessons learned, but that's the end of that. So let's watch. And I'm going to play about 3 minutes of it because we do have a limited amount of time. Action anytime. Now, notice particularly how terrible some of these shots are quality-wise. I'm going to talk about that specifically as we come in. It was an interesting process of how we set up the GoPros. Some we set up properly, and some we just ran out of time to set up properly, and it had a huge impact on shot quality. Okay, I'm going to dive out just because you can go to this if you want to capture that, and you'll go to the high-def version of this on Vimeo, and you can watch it in much more quality than you can see it here. So what did we do? Well, we created this world where we tried to figure out if we could get a full 16 cameras there to see if I could really, how responsive Final Cut Pro 10 was loaded up. It actually does 3 pages of 16 cameras, so it has the capacity to do a lot of cameras, but they're paged. So I only got to 14. I had one of my shooters dropped out, and he was bringing 2 cameras, so we only had 14 on set. I was disappointed in that. But it actually works out really well. This is just the angle editor, and as you can see when you're in Final Cut Pro 10, and we're going to try to slip over there and go into Final Cut 10, and I'll show you some of the actual editing things that we did through the project. It's really fun to cut multicam in this. I mean, it works pretty darn smoothly and really well. So the answer to the big question I have was, can Final Cut shoot, can handle that many cameras? And the answer was yes, pretty darn well. Perhaps not perfectly. I mean, this is not going to be like having a monstrous Grass Valley switcher, and I wouldn't do anything live with this. But in terms of being able to drill down into a lot of sources, figure out the story you want to tell, and get it told, it's an amazing tool. This is one of the planning documents that I did, and I guess I wanted to talk just a little bit about how difficult it is to manage that many cameras. We had a lot of GoPros. I think we ended up with 6 DSLRs and 8 GoPros shooting live. And as some of you know, GoPros will go for an hour, no problem, but the DSLRs, the 5D Mark IIs, are limited to 12 minutes at a take. So we literally had to spend a lot of time thinking about who's going to start what camera where. I only had 6 shooters, but I had all these cameras. So I worked on this concentric zone idea, which was to have an inner ring of GoPros that I would assign 3 guys to go out and each of them start 2 or 3 cameras, then a secondary ring, and then a tertiary ring, which were actually man cameras. And I had those guys on ClearCom so I could direct, so I made sure that of the DSLRs we wouldn't have like 4 shots of the guitar player, 4 medium shots of the guitar player. It worked pretty darn well. But there was a ton of things to learn. And one of the things to learn, a lot of people on the net, as soon as I posted this video, went, "Man, I love that GoPro guitar shot." And I went, "Thank you very much." It really was hard to do. And so I just wanted to mention, this is the kind of thing when you start adding a lot of cameras that you run into, because Daniel there is rigging our first guitar rig. And he had a little standoff riser, and he called me over, I looked at the shot, and I went, you know, it's good, but it's just not really very good. He said, well, let me put a riser on and get a little farther off. I said, great. So I go out, we're in the middle of the day of production, things are crazy. It was probably another 10 minutes before I was able to get back. And I looked at it, I said, man, it's a lot better, but I'm not sure it's all the way there. He goes, well, I have a double riser. And I go, great, let's try that. And so he goes off, that's another 10 to 15 minutes. You have 14 cameras. If you're gonna take a half an hour to dial in, you better have a lot of crew and a lot of people who know what they're doing in terms of cameras. As you add cameras, you do add complexity, but I was really pleased when he finally got the final rig, which is there. It was a really great shot. In fact, if you notice, I originally had a DSLR specified in there because I thought that was gonna get the guitar player's right-hand action, and the GoPro on the head I always knew I was gonna use. When I actually saw the shot we were able to rig, I thought, job done. I've got both hands, I can push in, and it's a great view that you don't normally get. So multicam does teach you a lot of interesting things. For those of you who are really fascinated with this and want to know, I'm actually in the final stages of putting together an iBook on this project that goes into tremendous detail about all the things that I figured out in terms of how to manage that many cameras. It also specifically talks about what I did in Final Cut Pro 10 in terms of setting things up. It's about $50. And for those of you who are really obsessive, you'll notice that there's a lot more noise in that shot than there is in that shot. And the changes in settings on some of the GoPros, particularly data rates, made a huge difference in the quality of the shots that came out. If we'd had a ton more time, I had a DSLR lead who was, a GoPro lead, we had both, but the GoPro lead was supposed to try to get everything set up to the same standard, and it's just really difficult. We had, a one-day shoot, quick in, quick out, and then all volunteer crew who weren't getting paid, so they did a great job. So if you'd like to download the book, this will take you to the iBook. I'm in the pending queue at the iTunes bookstore, so this will temporarily take you to a website where you can download it, and it'll give you a link to it. So it's a big $4.95, so it's not a big deal if you'd like to take a shot at how to do multicam. So I'm going to dive out of Keynote, open Final Cut Pro 10, see if everything pops up here, and here we are in the timeline. So, listen, I'm not going to explain how Final Cut Pro 10 works. That's something we couldn't do in a month and a half. But I am going to talk a little bit about some of the things that it surprised my being able to do. If you've never seen the angle editor, basically, here's a clip that has a little set of multiple windows up here in this little corner. That's telling me that that's a multi-clip from Final Cut. So if I were to go up and show in the viewer display the angles, you would get that switching view. And this is where you can just go through and touch, 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 switch to the different camera angles. It's a pretty simple process. Oh, do I dare do it? I'm going to do it. At the risk of taking another 30 seconds that I hadn't planned on taking. Go do it. Thank you, Mike. If you do start exploring Final Cut Pro 10, I urge you, please do not start by just diving into the timeline and starting to cut things. That's how we all learn most every other editor, but one of the things about Final Cut Pro 10 is that it's built on a bifurcated kind of idea. The timeline is very important, storylines in Final Cut parlance. But this area up here, the event browser, is an amazing tool all by itself. That's where the database lives, and that's where you can do all sorts of sorting and sifting and actual pre-editing on your imported assets. And when you pre-edit up there, you can trim, you can do color correction, you can do all sorts of things. That stays persistent, and then every time you bring it into a timeline, whatever decisions you made in the event browser flow in as metadata to the clips on your timeline, saving gargantuan amounts of time. I do a lot of voiceover work, and I actually do all my audio editing now in Final Cut Pro 10 because that metadata system of being able to do, I like this take, so I'm going to tag that as an A take, and this one is a B and C, makes it amazingly easy to do audio editing and then dump it out to the agency through the share menu in like one single step, and I've cut like huge amounts of time out of my audio editing because of that. And it does the same thing in some cases for video. So I'm really huge in favor of this. I will tell you that as well as I know this and as much as I've studied it, and I actually read books about taxonomy to try to figure out how to name things properly to get the best solution for naming things, I still mess up all the time. And this was a huge mess up for me. You will see here all these keywords that I put on the Jazz at the Nash project. So, you know, it's like, oh, look, that's obviously all my sax clips, and oh, this stuff down here is going to be all kick drum clips, and none of that mattered. I absolutely went in the wrong direction. I didn't realize, you know, we had 14 cameras, we did 2 songs, 2 takes each, so do the math. I had this huge group of clips, and when I went to make my angle cuts, what I really realized, you know what I just need to know was what comes from song 1, take 1? What comes from song 1, take 2? And so these 4 little clip things are all I needed. I way overthought my taxonomy and my how to name things process. And you can't really figure that out for yourself as like what's a good naming convention until you get to know the program a little and get to know what it can do. And once you do that, you start finding huge amounts of uses for it. All right, quickly I'm going to pop into the project library because I love the project library in Final Cut Pro 10. For those of you who haven't seen it before, you click over here on this little reel thing down in the corner and zip, all your online projects come out, everything that's on your hard drive. And by the way, everything you're seeing, including if I was to go in and edit, is off of this drive. This is the same drive I cut this whole original project on. So I've got one MacBook Pro, the model before they came out with Thunderbolt, and I'm using a simple little FireWire 800 drive, and that video and everything else I've cut in the last 7 months, 8 months, has been on these. That's all I use anymore. So my big cinema display and all the rest of that stuff, I'm using it for surfing the web. Yeah, Final Cut Pro 10 does like the fastest hardware and the most memory you can throw at it, and I know people are trying to run it on Mac Pros and stuff like that. I know, my beefy Mac Pro, I've got one of those, runs Final Cut like a dog. It'll run it, but it won't run it really well. And I had to upgrade the graphics card because my Mac Pro was before they did OpenCL on graphic card, and so it was a mess. This thing pretty well smokes. I want to show you some other quick little things. I'm going to open up a different project here. It's actually the same exact thing, but you'll notice something different. In that original one, I had standard 2-track audio, and I had, why are we not opening? There we go, thank you. When we did the audio recording, we did not only a 2-track master, but we did stems of each of the individual instruments. So it was really fun to go back and load up the stems and be able to play the project back and like do little things like, oh, look, the guitar guy is going to play over here, so let me just enhance the guitar track. So I brought him up a few dB by just literally laying this stuff out. Now, this is the kind of stuff you could do on all sorts of NLEs. This isn't specific to Final Cut Pro 10, but it did get me thinking in different terms. And now I'm going to show you something that is, I think, very cool, which is as I started thinking differently about how Final Cut worked and what I could do, I came into this idea that, okay, so I've got this project. Normally I would do the video, and I'd stop there. But now, what else could I do? Could I do something fun? Yeah, well, what about just watching the performance from the point of view of the piano player? So we go through the whole thing, and you can see the original right, but now, if you're a musician and you're a piano player, you can watch through this whole program just isolated on what the piano player does. Or, oh, thanks. Too loud? I'm sorry if I'm shouting at people, my apologies. Or let's say the drummer, we had both kick work and snare work. So what if I've got a drummer who's interested in how he played? I should probably pop this up to full screen, but I think you get the idea. Looking at the project manager and how they've laid things out really started creating some different thinking processes for me in terms of how to handle multicam work. That's the thing I find fascinating about Final Cut Pro 10. It's causing me to think differently about how I might be able to work with video, with multicam, with new kinds of clips. I'm using, one of the things I love most about this is the share menu because I'm able, it's auto-linked now into my Vimeo account, so I can literally do client dubs, and if the project is small, I just email them out directly from the Final Cut Pro 10 timeline, but if it's bigger, I just plop it up to Vimeo, and it usually takes me about 4 minutes or something like that, and then email out a link to all of my clients, and anybody on the world can pop right up to my Vimeo account and watch that stuff. Password protected and the rest. So it's causing me to do a lot of rethinking of workflow. So rather than dive into this, oh, by the way, for those of you who don't know about it, you can actually just pop into any of these things, and I've got a pretty small window here, but just literally you can play these timelines right from the project library. So you don't actually have to, unlike Final Cut Pro Legacy, you don't actually have to load up projects to play them, which is really great if you're trying to figure out, well, which cut was the one that had the girl in the yellow coat. If you can't actually see it there, you can literally scrub through it and watch and see things really quickly and easily. This metadata foundation and the fact that I think they built this to give you a lot of access to your material all the time live is really cool. Okay, question time. Dive in with questions. Yes?
Were you editing off of proxy file?
I'm going to get the microphone.
Oh, get the microphone. Sorry about that.
Hold on. You want to get the microphone going, so be sure to pass it around if you can.
There you go.
And it's 50 cents.
Go ahead.
Did you make proxy files, smaller proxy
Yes.
files, and edit off those?
I knew from the beginning that with pushing Final Cut Pro 10 to as many cameras as possible, it would only be sensible to do proxy files, so yes, I did proxies of all of these. Proxies are different in Final Cut Pro 10 than I am used to. In the old days when I was working on other systems and I had proxy files, I always thought of them as crappy and small. In Final Cut Pro 10, I don't know how they managed to do it, but the proxies, I sometimes forget I'm working in proxy. Even when I'm editing, even if I'm doing titling, even if I'm going in and looking at edges of text, I just forget. They did a really good job of being able to make these small files that look really good. So I have to kick myself in the head and go, okay, you're going to output a final full scale, let's switch back to original media. It is very quick to do that.
Do you recall the resolution of your original files versus the...
I'm shooting almost all DSLR, so they came in after, they came in as 1920 1080 ProRes 422. That's what, well, they come in as 1920 1080 H.264 DSLR files. Final Cut transcodes them into ProRes 422, and then I could have them transcode into high res, but there's no sense in that since the DSLR has a, I think, 100 megabit a second data rate max. So the middle ProRes is more than enough to take care of that. And I'm not keying, so I don't really need the 4 extra alpha channel bits. Yes?
Pass the...
Mike, run the mic.
I can just talk real loud.
Okay, good. I like it.
Probably an elementary question for Final Cut 10, probably everybody knows, but how did you synchronize all those non-professional cameras?
Okay. Final Cut Pro 10 has a really cool couple of things in. Everybody knows about pluralize, right? It's like, let's use the sound thing. They built it. They built a form of that in here. So you have a variety. That's not all they built into it. I mean, they really did think this through. So you have an option when you're bringing in footage. If I have a timeline and I'm going to go sync things in the angle editor, I can do it by audio waveforms. I can also do it by about 4 or 5 other things. I can put a manual marker on and it'll sync by marker. If I have a clapboard or something else with an audio pop, I can sync by that. Final Cut has actually 4 or 5, if I remember correctly, and I wish Phil was here because he'd know for sure. But it has a variety of ways, and I have found circumstances where I bring in my first 7 or 8 clips and I do it one way because they all have good scratch tracks. I mean, most of the DSLRs had good scratch tracks. And then when I start bringing in GoPros, I look at them, I say, okay, these 3 were in skeleton housings. They have pretty good audio. I'll bring those in and see if they'll sync. They will. And then I'll go get the ones that were in waterproof housings that have terrible audio tracks. Some of them won't sync, so I'll go in there. I'll find something on my existing track, put a marker on that same place on the GoPro, and then it's in. Yes?
Did you have to shoot all the cameras at the same frame rate?
Yes. I wanted to try. My goal was not to see how many different kinds of cameras I could get. I thought that would be a little too weird. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have repeated the question. Yeah, did you have all the cameras set at the same frame rate? And the answer to that is yes. We set all the DSLRs, tried to set them all the same, and we tried to set all the GoPros the same, although the pure time it takes to organize this with a volunteer crew in one day, we saw it on Cinco de Mayo, so I promised them Mexican food in exchange for helping me. And so that's how I got them all out there. But I didn't want to abuse them by letting them come out and work like a 20-hour day. That would have been cheesy, so I didn't do that. Yeah, in the back, go ahead. Oh, Mike's going to run you a microphone.
Whatever that
Can you tell it not to open all of your projects so that you don't have to load up everything, number one? And number two, can you move projects easily between one drive and another?
Okay. First, yes, Phil Hodgett's tool does a great job of closing down or opening up. That's one of the things you have to learn about Final Cut Pro 10 as you get in there. It is not like the old days. In 7, you had a capture scratch. It was in some place. You would link to them, but it's a flat file, simple database. Everything in Final Cut Pro 10 is relational under the hood. And so when you move stuff, it doesn't like you at all. There's a built-in move command that lets you move. There's a built-in project move command. If you religiously lose those things, they will They will move all your assets with all the database relationships intact, and you will have fun times and you will love it. But if you start dragging stuff around in the Finder, you're going to have a miserable existence. So my suggestion to you is don't do that in 10. It's different.
What's the name of that tool that Philip has? Event Manager?
Yeah, Event Manager. Okay. And it's to manage different events. How far do I want to go with this? So that is one thing. Another thing is that my whole backup and project strategy has changed since I've been on Final Cut Pro 10. In my thinking about 7, it was I want it on the hard drive of the main machine. I didn't want to get too far outside. I don't work in a network environment. I don't work with 30 editors having to run off of something. But I tried, so my thought about my old machines was I want my capture scratch on the central drives as quick to the bus as they can be so that I have great throughput and performance. This doesn't work the same way in my understanding. So when I say that all my projects live on these little extra drives, they do. Events, projects, the whole thing. If I were to come out here and unplug this drive, all this stuff down here, all these projects would go away, and I would be left with just this machine and just this stuff up there. And conversely, if I plug this back in, and this is the important point to me with Final Cut running, it'll look out there and go, aha, that's an event. I know how to do that, and it'll just suck it all in, sometimes in 10 seconds. So I find there's almost no penalty for working with clients and projects on external drives. They're cheap. I mean, this is $129 for almost a gigabyte, and I've got this whole 14-camera project on it in both original and ProRes. So you do have to think different project management skills. It's not the same as it was. And if you're in a collaborative workflow, be very careful and read up a lot and talk to people who know how to do that, because that is an undeveloped piece, in my opinion now, of Final Cut Pro 10. I believe with the tools and the things I see, it's going to develop, but I don't know anything more than you do about that. I just see I can see some of the things where I think this is going, and I think it's very cool.